Ed in Austin, hello. And
Hey,
my finger's on the trigger. Hello?
Hey, how you guys doing?
Good. What you got for us?
All right. Hey, the Bible teaches in the Old Testament that the Jews were the ones who had built the Egyptian pyramids, and I've been told by a couple of people that there was no proof to actually indicate that there were ever even Jews in Egypt to do that. I've wondered, can y'all comment on that? Do y'all know if it's same?
There are. I don't know the details. There are books on the subject. I think it was claimed that the Jews were among the pyramid builders in the Bible. I think that was the original claim, that they were. Anyway, but
right. I'm not sure of the answer to your question. I know I've heard that there's not good evidence to indicate that some nomadic tribe was wandering that particular area of the desert for 40 years.
Right.
But when it comes to historical stuff that underlies the background of the Old Testament, I would probably go check out Jews, God, and History by Max Dimont, D-I-M-O-N-T. He's Jewish, so I'm not sure that he's a completely objective source, but he does have a really good take on separating the history from the cultural stories.
Given how close the two countries are together, it's not impossible to think that they may have wandered in there. But
is the modern Israel like anywhere? I mean, is it in the same physical location as the historical Israel?
I believe so.
We're not Bible people.
We're not Bible people.
Call back when Matt's on.
Yeah, it's my understanding that the Egyptians kept very good records of their their successes and failures and these sorts of things, and that these records are still available to us. It's not perfect, of course, but if there was such an event like the Exodus. Like the Bible, the historical records would reflect that, and they simply don't. So that's one issue.
I think there were some recently, like the last month or two, there were some recent archaeological findings where they had uncovered these mass graves that were actually like pretty much at the footsteps at some of these pyramids, indicating that the people who had built the pyramids, were very special. Just because the Egyptians weren't going to have. They weren't going to have just, Joe Blow off the street buried near their holy sites like that.
Well,
I don't know if you've heard that.
I don't know. The pyramids were built over 60, 70 years, and this was very, very hard work by people working out in the sun with no water. I think that they all drank, alcohol because that was the only thing that was safe to drink. So it wasn't an easy life for those folks. I understand that a lot of those folks were pretty skilled, so they might have been somewhat revered. As far as burials, I don't know. There's a lot of burial chambers and things in and around the pyramids. The pyramids themselves are a burial chamber, right, for the kings.
Right. The story of Joseph in the Old Testament. The lowly Jew who becomes sort of a hierarchy member of the Egyptian, government or what have you. And I sort of have doubts just about that alone, because I would have thought that the Egyptians, like most royal families, are prejudiced, xenophobic, and what have you. So I don't know that they would have these open arms to some Jew.
I don't even know if you have to go so far as to find logical inconsistencies in these stories, because really, there's no telling how much of it is just completely made up, without any specific evidence for the stuff.
Right.
It seemed like a lot of Genesis is about sort of creating a genealogical map of the world, if you will, and it's a lot of it's made up, of course, and maybe all of it's made up. Right. But it was really sort of say these people are from this person. He was the patriarch of these folks, and Joseph did this, and these sorts of things, and pretty much the whole Genesis has this sort of flavor of. This is where this group of people came to be. This is their origin story and how it all fits into a coherent whole. And I don't have any reason to think that this Joseph story is any different, because it's just part and parcel of that. It's no different in many ways than the others.
Right.
Okay. Well.
All right. Well, thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, Ed.
Sure.
I apologize for thinking that was a joke.
Well,
it was a
That's
good question.
Could be.
Yes.
It was an interesting question.
Okay, now, if the studio is correct, this is also Ed in Austin coming up next.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if they recorded it accurately, but it sounds like it's a theist who would like to ask us why we don't believe in God. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Welcome.
Are you Ed?
I'm good.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Is your name Ed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
What do you got for us?
That's a coincidence.
Yeah, pretty coincidence. Anyways, I just want to start off by saying that you talk about how the Bible and, everything within it, everything that goes in it, how really, to an extent it has no scientific basis, right?
I wouldn't say everything, but
a lot of
It's a collection of stories. I mean, some of it may have some basis in truth. I mean, there may be places that existed. There may be people who existed. There are many places where we know it's false or it's self-contradictory. So, you have to take it all with a grain of salt.
Well, have you ever heard anything about the Quran?
yes.
Yeah, I feel the same way about it.
There are many things in the Quran that seem to people have been talking about lately about how they actually scientifically add up. Like, they're not, in the sense that supposedly the Quran talks about Big Bang Theory, even though it was written many years before.
Yeah. This is an apologetic, an Islamic apologetic that's just as much BS as a lot of other stuff. So no, I don't buy it either.
Yeah. Well, what if it was that the fact that science was actually just the study of God's work, and that his work was so actually incomprehensible that you think you're disproving it, and really you're just studying what he created?
Well, I mean, if there was any reason to believe that there was a God, then obviously the science being the study of the universe would be the study of things that God has done in creating that stuff. But there isn't any reason to believe it. Unless you've got one.
The only reason I could find is that the order of the universe and everything that they study is almost too perfect to be a complete coincidence. Now, even though the universe was created over billions of years, since the time it was, from the Big Bang, from that point, the exact order of things is almost too perfect. In the sense, why is it that, it hadn't collapsed yet and it continues to expand and, everything is almost in nearly perfect order?
Do you have something to comment on that?
No, I just recognize the argument, the whole
okay.
Entropy argument, but I am no expert, so.
Why would, I mean, who's arguing that the universe is disordered and you can have order as an emergent property of the forces that exist in nature, like gravity and the strong nuclear force and weak nuclear force and so on. So you can have order from these things, and we have things like crystals are a great example of you have order emerging out of the fact that it's a lower potential energy for these crystals be created rather than the chaos that would otherwise be there. So I don't see that there needs to be a God for there to be order.
Right. Well, I mean, this is also referred to as the anthropic principle. I think one of the things that theists like to say is that there has to be a very special set of conditions in order for us to be here observing the universe and talking about it, because any other configuration and there would be nothing. Is that kind of along the lines of what you were talking about?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are a couple of issues with that. Number one is that, given any number of possible configurations that didn't lead to life, there aren't any people there saying that, saying, oh, isn't it miraculous? So people talk about, isn't it amazing that here we are at this particular distance from the sun, where it's exactly warm enough for us to exist, and there's just enough oxygen for us to breathe. And then meanwhile, there are probably some nitrogen-breathing aliens somewhere on a gas giant, very, very close to the sun, in a distant galaxy, saying, "Isn't it amazing that our planet has to be in exactly the right configuration that is perfect for us to survive?" The thing is that matter does what does stuff with what it's given. Douglas Adams kind of made an analogy to a sentient puddle, saying, "Isn't it amazing that this hole in the ground is exactly the right shape for me to fit in?"
And another answer is if the universe was fine-tuned for life as we know it, do the calculation of just how much of the universe the life as we know it can live in. We live on a very, very thin layer of this very, 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 very small sphere in a very, very large solar system, in a very large galaxy, in a very large set of galaxies, and there are not very many places like that. And the idea that the universe was created just for this life is really pretty absurd when you look at how big the universe is.
Well, that's what brings back the Quran, is that in the Quran, it is stated that God created other worlds as well.
Oh, so are you a Muslim? Just curious.
No, I just find it interesting. I just find
Well,
their belief interesting.
The Quran was written quite a bit later than the rest of the Bible. It's only 1300
700 AD.
700 AD.
Right.
I guess they hadn't developed telescopes yet,
right.
but maybe they had a good guess.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, I'm not willing to accept that claim without hearing the exact
verse.
hearing the exact wording, because that people who are apologists for particular religious texts will bend over backwards to go out of their way to take some very, very vague language and then pick on a particular point of science that sounds a little bit like it, and then say, "See, that's exactly, they exactly predicted that."
Well, even if it says that, it doesn't mean anything, because, the Civil War really happened, but that doesn't make Gone with the Wind a work of fact.
Right.
So, even if it does say God created other worlds, that doesn't apply anything other than that statement. That could happen on pure chance.
Sure. And I was also going to mention
and also, Muslims were not idiots. I mean, the Muslim world developed quite a lot of science.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say too that we have the Mormon religion, which is more modern. Was created whole cloth, and it was created by somebody who was pretty fascinated by other worlds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the notion of astronomy and these sorts of things, and so not surprisingly, these elements made it into the Mormon religion, and I don't know. I think that all of these religions are period pieces in the sense that they capture the interests and biases and beliefs and morals and such of the people who created these holy books, and I don't see any magic, in the Bible, in the Quran, or any of these books that leads us to believe that there's real revelation there. And real science or real any sort of advance. There may be things that they got right, but it could be, and a lot of these things I think can be explained away pretty easily. I don't see any miraculous stuff in there. One example, the Ten Commandments. God supposedly came down with these tablets or whatever, and they were dropped on the floor and crumbled to pieces, right? Well, God could have just as easily made, a diamond-coated titanium tablets, right? And that's certainly something that we can do today.
There's always Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 1.
Right.
I bring you 15, 10 commandments.
Right. He drops one of the three. Yeah. Anyway. But my point is, why make this out of crumble stone or sandstone or whatever? What kind of craziness is that? Why not make it out of something, especially since this is supposedly the most valuable religious artifact ever created in the history of the universe? Why make it so something that would fall apart That makes no sense.
That may be kind of wandering off the question.
Wandering off the question. Well, okay.
All right.
Well, it seems like that, all in all, given that if there was any truth to it, it had been distorted over long periods of time by people constantly rewriting it, rereading it, reinterpreting it.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to all those things. But do you think there's any matter of truth that if God, if he existed, if he ever came to Earth, that there's any way that the actual truth of it could have been distorted?
Well, we have Thomas Paine, who was one of the sort of founders of the United States. He actually named the United States, America. He argued in his Age of Reason that God would never use a holy book as a communication device for precisely this reason. And I think he made a very compelling argument that hasn't been addressed, hasn't been knocked down at all. I think his argument is still rock solid today.
There's a really serious problem with just assuming that you know the guy who created the universe and he's never wrong. It gives people the idea that they're infallible by proxy. People wind up believing that maybe I don't know everything, but I have this direct phone line to the creator of the universe, and he knows everything. So if I hear something in my head, or I read something in a book that makes sense, and I think it's by him, then I have free license to go ahead and believe that whatever I think is absolutely 100% correct with no possibility of error. This, not coincidentally, has led to hundreds of horrible wars throughout the history of the universe, because when you have two groups of people who think that they've got the immutable truth and they don't agree on what that truth is, then they fight each other for it. I don't see any particular reason to believe that anybody has been told the absolute truth. I think the evidence doesn't bear it out. And the best we can do is examine the universe objectively without these assumptions of something like a God, and come to whatever conclusion is pointed to by the evidence. And so far as I can tell, God isn't it.
So, what if it was the fact that if there was a God, but he never came to Earth in the first place, but somehow his existence was still known? Again, coming back to the
How
point
is it known? That's my question. How is it known to you or anyone?
Well, the way I look at it, there's two possibilities. One, it was just created by ancient people trying to explain the crazy forces they saw around them. Or two, we could go off the crazy belief, the religious people play off of, is that God's work is supposedly, so incomprehensible, and he can put any thought into your head as he's so.
So what you're saying is it's not known, it's just a complete mystery to us, and yet you're still willing to say that, that there's definitely a God because either you feel it or you just believe unquestioningly people in the past who've said they feel it.
No, I say it because I feel that there is some kind of God, but not an intelligent being in the sentient sense that he would send down some words to some random people on Earth.
How do you know?
There is some form of God. Because, well, they're still investigating things that go into atoms.
They're still investigating it. How do you know that it's God?
Because some force is driving it, and we can't explain it yet.
Some force called God.
To an extent, yes.
How do you know?
How do I know?
Yeah, I mean,
it seems like you're
all
giving...
you're saying is there's unknown stuff, and I want to call it God.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Well, it has to lead down to something, doesn't it? To the point of creation.
Called God?
I guess if you want.
Why?
To call it.
Why not just say I don't know? Isn't that more honest?
Well, I'm using the word God just to explain the fact that I don't know.
Okay, so
it seems
I
like
agree
you're
with
leaping
you.
to a conclusion. This is what it sounds like
I agree
to
with
us.
you. If God just means I don't know, then yeah, there is an I don't know. I find little reason to be interested in that kind of word game. So anyway, thanks for your call.